All right, let's talk about the Three Kingdoms. When you think of that era, you probably picture these larger-than-life heroes. And right up there at the top is one of Cao Cao's most famous generals, the one-eyed warrior Xiahou Dun. His whole reputation, really, is built on one of the most insane moments you'll ever read. So picture this, middle of a chaotic battle. An arrow hits him square in the eye. Does he fall? Heck no. He rips the arrow out, his eyeball still stuck to the end of it, shouts this incredible line, and then he eats his own eye. And then he charges forward and kills the archer who shot him. I mean, come on, that is the stuff of pure legend. Because that's what we're digging into today. There are really two Xiahou Duns. You've got the peerless, eye-eating warrior from the stories, and then you have the real historical man whose actual value to Cao Cao was something completely different. And, this is where it gets really interesting. So first up, let's just break down that incredible story, the one that has pretty much defined his image for hundreds of years. And right away, the difference is just wow. On the left, you have the novel, The Romance of the Three Kingdoms. That's where we get the epic, dramatic scene. But on the right, that's the actual historical text, the records of the Three Kingdoms. And its version is so blunt, it just says he was hit by a stray arrow and lost his eye. Period. That's it. No speech, no eating the eyeball, nothing. And here's the kicker. In reality, this injury wasn't a moment of pride for him at all. It was a source of deep, deep humiliation. His own soldiers started calling him Blind Xiahou, and he hated it so much that he would apparently smash any mirror he saw. So think about that. The legend literally took his greatest shame and turned it into his moment of greatest glory. Okay, so if the most famous thing he ever did in a battle is pure fiction, what about the rest of his career? Was he still that unstoppable general we all imagine him to be? Well, the history books tell a slightly different story. As a field commander, his record was actually kinda spotty. For instance, in 194, he got himself captured and taken hostage. Not by some legendary enemy, but by his own troops who decided to mutiny. He had to be bailed out by one of his own officers. Then later, in 202, he completely ignored advice from his subordinates and charged straight into a really obvious fire ambush set up by Liu Bei, getting his army totally wrecked. So yeah, he was brave, for sure, but a brilliant battlefield tactician? Not so much.
So this begs the question, right? If he wasn't Cao Cao's best general, then why was he one of his most important commanders? And this is where we get to the heart of the real Xiahou Dun. His value wasn't his tactics. It was something way more fundamental.
His number one trait, the thing that defined him, was just absolute rock-solid loyalty. And this goes way back. This wasn't something he just developed in the army. When he was only 14 years old, he tracked down and killed a guy just for insulting his teacher. I mean, that tells you everything you need to know about his character right there. This fierce, protective loyalty was just baked into who he was. And that loyalty earned him a level of trust from Cao Cao that nobody else got. Think about this. He was the only general allowed to walk into Cao Cao's private chambers without being announced. In an age of constant plots and assassinations, that is an insane level of trust. He was also invited to ride in the same carriage as Cao Cao, a huge symbol of respect. And when Cao Cao's own family was in danger, who did he send? Xiahou Dun. And let's be super clear here. Even the top-tier battlefield geniuses like Zhang Liao or Cao Ren, they never got these kinds of personal honors. This was a special bond, a unique relationship built not on how many battles he won, but on a lifetime of just unquestionable devotion. But his loyalty wasn't his only hidden talent. After some of those military mistakes, Cao Cao did something really smart. He moved Xiahou Dun into a completely different role. A role where, it turns out, he would really shine. And this, right here, this was his true masterpiece. A massive famine hits the land, locusts everywhere. What does Xiahou Dun do? He becomes an administrator. He figures out the root of the problem, he engineers this huge project to dam a river for irrigation. And then, and this is the most important part, he leads by example. He was personally out there in the mud, working right alongside the soldiers and the common people to get it done. Generals just didn't do that. This was the real guy behind the scary armor. He lived a simple life himself, but he was incredibly generous with his own troops, sharing everything he had. He was also a lifelong student and would actually invite his old teacher to his army camps to keep up with his lessons. Towards the end of his career, he wasn't charging on the front lines. He was a logistical mastermind. basically a grand coordinator, overseeing dozens of armies from the rear, making sure the entire war machine kept on running smoothly. So what we have are two completely different men who just happen to share the same name. How do we square the eye-eating berserker with the humble, diligent administrator? Well, when you lay it all out like this, it becomes pretty clear. The legend gives us this unforgettable, badass warrior, defined by one single bloody moment. But the reality? The reality is a story of a loyal administrator, defined not by one moment, but by a whole lifetime of service. His real value wasn't in his skill on the battlefield, it was in that unquestioned loyalty.
And, the final verdict really comes from history itself. After Xiahou Dun died, he was given a special posthumous title by the state. He wasn't called Marquis the Fierce or the Brave. He was named Marquis Zong. And Zong means loyal. The loyal Marquis. Even the empire he helped build knew that his greatest virtue, his defining legacy, wasn't his fighting ability, but his incredible character.
So, I guess that leaves us with one final thought. The story of eating the eyeball is amazing. It's thrilling. It's why we all know his name. But the real story is about humility and duty and a quiet, unshakable loyalty. So which one is actually more powerful? The thrilling myth we all love to tell, or the quiet truth of a life well lived? Something to think about.